Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this very, very cool panel. It hasn't even started yet, but I know it's going to be great because we are just joined by the most incredible three women today. And I want to go straight into it because at Girl Up, we have the best, it's 15-minute panels, right? It's so adapted to people's attention span, and we have such knowledgeable panelists. So we're going to go right into it, and we're going to be talking about youth advocacy. And I want to start with you, Julieta. I mean, you were at COP this year, and there was a lot of talk about who was left out of COP and who was left out of a lot of activism in general, but particularly climate activism. And so I'm just curious, have you ever felt underestimated in those rooms, and how do you combat that? And also, what are the consequences of often girls being left out of these really important conversations?
Wow, tough question. And first of all, thank you so much for having me here. So the quick answer actually would be yes. Actually, when I went to COP25, I was 15 at the moment, and I remember perfectly that I got invited to a panel, like to hear actually. And a guy told me, please get into the panel because we need more women in the room. This is true. and kind of my expectations of COP, it was the first day, immediately fell apart. It was like, this is just women for the picture, just girls for the picture. So it's hard, of course. And it's so important to have young people on the table, because who understands better the problems that youth and adolescents are going through that youth and adolescents. And it's not just because we want to have a space and table, but it's because we get we live the problems. We're not as spectators of it. And also, I think there's a lot of people that would talk about this redesign of a new world. We redesign policies, we redesign economy, and we're rethinking a lot of things. And part of that is how are we present and we have an actual voice in the process of decision making. Especially when we talk about the climate crisis, we are a generation that had so many access to information, education, to this digital area, right? And we have been working a lot on connecting the scientific community with civil society. How can we actually find a common ground, a connection between these two worlds that feel like there's worlds apart? So yes, we definitely must be present, but not only to spectate, but be protagonists of it.
Yeah, not just spectators, protagonists, and not just at part of the audience, but actually having the mic and being on stage. When you started your story and you were like, this man said, I was getting ready to cringe, but I'm happy that you had a positive experience and that there were, I think it's important to talk about those things, right? There are bridges that are being really built intergenerationally across gender, across different identities. And I really wanted to get into that with you, Anita, as well, because you're kind of an expert on that, right? You're literally at the intersection of intergenerational activism and really bringing different people of different ages together. So I'm curious why you think that's important, and how can adults get better at listening to people who are not adults yet?
Yeah, I think also just to echo what Julieta said, I think a lot of the times we get into these spaces and we are treated as tokens, and we are treated as spectators just to fill in the room and just to be present and to check. It's almost like a checklist, So it's really important that they kind of adopt and adapt a mentality that young people are in these spaces to be heard and to actually drive about the change. So it's something that's been quite talked about, even quite recently, especially in the context of South Africa. Recently, there's been several kind of conversations around our leaders and age and so on and so forth, and it's come to a point where young people are now not even being gentle about it. They're asserting themselves in these spaces, and they're saying very vocally that we belong in these spaces. So don't just have us as activists and for pictures and for tokenism. Have us in these spaces so we can drive about the change. Have us part of policy making. Have us part of all of these integral decision-making tables. So yeah, I think definitely we need to be at a point where we as young people are listened to and we are seen as changers, as the drivers of change and not just spectators.
Yeah. And how do you know that you're being heard and actually listened? I'm curious. How is that something you can describe?
Yeah, I think once you're, for example, if there's some form of policy or research work that's been done, if you're not just being like a participant and they're just taking information from you, but you being part of the actual kind of research or the actual document or a person who's part of making that document, then you kind of feel heard and you kind of get that idea that your thoughts and your ideas are, kind of accepted and are respected. So, yeah.
I love that. Yeah. Like not just being invited to the table, but being invited to dance, right? That sort of quote that it's more of an active participation, and not just for show. I love that. Valeria, I wanted to, you're doing so many cool things. One of the things you're doing is you actually have a podcast. And I think that's so a lot of people have podcasts, but there are not a lot of podcasts that add so much value and are really helping people understand the world a little bit better. I'm curious how you approach using sort of these modern tools, and again, use them with your generation and make sure though that they're reaching people who might not be listening to a podcast or who might not be on social media. I'm curious how those conversations sort of happen.
Yeah, I mean, my podcast was, I would say, actually the result of the pandemic, because it was for me a way to try to communicate with my community. And one of the main questions that we asked ourselves as activists was, what can you do to organize your community when you're not able to be present in person? And that was one of the main questions we asked ourselves, especially here in Mexico. We saw a lot of things happening in Congress, but how do you occupy physical spaces when Congress is, like getting together through Zoom? Like, how do you actually make sure you're part of those conversations? So one of the things that I realized by talking to my community and talking to other activists was, if we're not able to be present physically in Congress, we might as well start taking over the spaces that we know we're present in. And we also start, making efforts to try to communicate with our representatives. And I think I do want to echo what both Julieta and Anita have been talking about, which is making sure that young people are being heard and are being present in decision-making spaces. And I had the opportunity to work as a Next Generation Fellow last year. And now Anita has the great honor and responsibility of continuing that work. But one of the things we did was that we wrote Our Future Agenda, which, by the way, is available in ourfutureagenda.org in case anyone wants to read the great recommendations of thousands of amazing young leaders. And what we realized when we were writing this report is that it's not only a question of getting into the room, but it's also the accessibility and viability of creating those rooms. So we see it in COP26 and we see it in future summits, where it's not only expensive, but it also has carbon emissions and just like a big sustainability question when it comes to not only getting young people there, but also making sure that they're being heard once they are there. So one of the many lessons that we learned from writing Our Future Agenda is the power of connecting online and connecting through the many tools that we have now. Now we know that we have access to due to the pandemic. So while writing Our Future Agenda, we got the opportunity to talk to thousands of young activists, and it would have not been able to if we, one, didn't create the spaces online, and two, didn't make sure that they had the accessibility to get to those spaces. So I think now we're facing a question on how do we make sure the spaces are available, but also what are the type of spaces we want to create to make sure that we are being heard and not only present physically.
Yeah, wow, that's incredible. I think that brings up such an important issue about digital activism. And I think this question of how do we make sure that we're really utilizing these tools in order to build and to organize, not just to disorganize. Sometimes even what's happening in the States right now, I think a lot of people are in a lot of pain. They're very confused. They're very scared. And something that I've been thinking about, I'm curious what your thoughts are, just as a follow-up, how do we make sure that people are not isolating, right? In trying to spend a lot of time on their phones and a lot of time on these platforms or a lot of time virtually organizing. How do we make sure that they still are sort of connecting in real person? Or is that not necessary anymore? Is that like an old millennial, sort of geriatric millennial sort of perspective on activism?
No, I think definitely one of the other takeaways of COVID-19 and the pandemic is we cannot live with only one thing. It's not only online activism or only in-person activism. The reality is that we now live in a globalized society where intersectionality should be at the center of the conversation. And because intersectionality should be at the center, we need to hear the perspectives of other young people like Anita, Julieta, yourself, and just like people all over the world. And because of that, I think it's about organizing online spaces so we make sure intersectionality is there, but also making sure that we have in-person follow-ups to those intersectional spaces that we created online.
Love it. Love it. Making the pie bigger, right? It's not either or, it's and more. I really love that. So we have only a few, not a few, but like 5 or 6 minutes left. So, and I want to make sure to get all of you in on one last question that I know I have, and I'm desperate to have your brilliant knowledge on, which is, how do we keep ourselves feeling engaged and positive and healthy and productive when the news cycle, no matter where you live kind of in the world right now, is pretty difficult. There's a lot of things that feel like they're getting worse, not better. And I'm just curious, and we can start with you, Julieta, is how do you approach that on a personal level? And also, do you feel like you need to be strong to model that to other people, but then do you feel like sometimes you just kind of want to be sad or want to be depressed or want to sort of do what other people are doing and hang out instead of fighting all the time? I'm just curious how you all sort of balance that, because I know there's a lot of people who are wondering how to do it in their lives, and you're so active and you guys are really the leaders in this space. So I'm just curious how you sort of manage that.
I mean, I'm going to be completely honest with you, Liz. Being an activist is exhausting, and I'm pretty sure every single person that has been somehow engaged with this world knows that. It's like fighting and fighting over and over and over again. But I think the best medicine that you can have is create community. With Tremendous Women Platform, what I find, it's not only a place to launch projects, create new ideas, and it's a safe zone. And to find people that are interested in finding actual solutions, but not only for you, like for personal benefit, for your community, people you engage with. I work with girls, 12-year-old girls that grew up thinking that clouds were made by industries. Girls that are that are the same girls that are fighting every single day of their lives to not only find a solution for them, for their sister, for the brother, for their mother, for every single person they engage with. And just to finish with this idea, but what Valeria said about intersectionality is so fundamental. What young people are seeing right now is that every single problem is connected. I work with the connection with the sustainability agenda and the gender agenda. I mean, women and girls are 14 times more vulnerable to die in a natural disaster. 80% of climate refugees are women and girls. So we must find a solution. We must educate girls, find community, find network, and show them that they are not alone. They are never alone, and we must be together. We're not competition, we're allies.
Yeah, I love that. Anita, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So for me, how I kind of keep saying is, as much as there's a lot of bad things that are happening around the world, there's also a lot of good things that is happening. So I like to kind of keep a good balance. I used to work in journalism quite a bit. So I know you have to balance quite a bit your good news and your bad news. So your overconsumption of bad news will have you really depressed and sad. So you have to kind of balance that, a little feel-good story here and there, you know. So I tend to do a lot of that. Also, just speaking to people, as much as you know, you speak to people who are in difficult circumstances, as much as, you know, that is happening to them, but there's a lot of other good things and a lot of like good perspectives and, you know, really human, like a really good human connection that will, you know, kind of overshadow the whole, you know, doom and gloom that is happening. So that's what I like to do. So if I happen to be in a conversation with a person that I'm trying to help out of a difficult situation, we don't just focus on that difficult situation. We talk about that difficult situation, of course, but we also try to get a human connection and try to get to the good side of life. So yeah, that's what I try to do to keep sane. Yeah.
I love that. Valeria, bring it home.
So I think for me, it has been definitely placing boundaries. And I think that I feel like that sounds kind of harsh and like super
No.
like what's going on. But like honestly, I think I had to learn the bad way that it's important to place boundaries for yourself. You need to know yourself, learn from yourself, and know when it's the right time to not answer your phone because you need a 5-minute break or maybe a 12-hour break in your room doing nothing. And when it's a good time to, you know, answer. And I think, I mean, there's so much that is left to say about this, but I would say honestly, just listen to your gut, know yourself, and most importantly, put your mental health at first. Like that should be your priority always. Because if you don't care about yourself and if you don't take care for yourself, no one will. And we need you. We will continue with this great bunch of work that is ahead of us. So take care of yourself, listen to yourself, and know your boundaries, place them, and just, you know, this is a great, beautiful way of self-love, self-respect, and also, you know, giving back to your community by giving back to yourself.
Oh, I love that. Yes. Community care, self-care, it's all connected. And rest is productive. You're being productive. Your brain is doing a million things, even while you're sleeping, and making connections, right? Sometimes I wake up and finally I have, you know, it feels like my brain was at work harder than me punishing myself to stay up late, right? So naps, guys. Everyone remember, that's a big takeaway. In addition to so many other things, thank you so much, ladies. This was so informative. All three of you are just completely badass, and keep doing what you're doing and keep resting as well, and taking care of yourselves. Thank you, Julieta, Valeria, and Anita. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.